My daughter checks on me every single morning at 7 o'clock. Not a text, not a quick voicemail. A real phone call, the kind where she waits for me to pick up and then asks the same question she has asked every morning for the past 2 years. Did you take your medication, Dad? If I say yes, she tells me to have a good day and hangs up within 30 seconds. If I hesitate even a moment, she launches into a list of reasons why the pills matter, why the doctor said consistency is everything, why she worries. I used to find it comforting. A man living alone in a house that once held 4 people needs someone to notice he's still breathing. That morning in October, I almost didn't answer. I was standing at the kitchen sink, watching the sun come up over the ridge behind the property. The same ridge my wife Dorothy used to paint watercolors of on Saturday mornings. The phone buzzed on the counter and I looked at it and felt something I couldn't name. A heaviness, like the air before a storm when everything goes quiet and the birds stop singing and you know something is coming, but you don't know what shape it will take. I picked up on the 4th ring. Did you take your medication, Dad? Not yet, I said. I was just about to. There was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds too long. Okay, she said. I'll call you tonight. She hung up before I could say goodbye. I stood there holding the phone and staring at the ridge, and I thought about Dorothy, the way she always said my gut was smarter than my brain. She said that right up until the end, even when the cancer had taken most everything else from her. Trust what you feel before you can explain it, Harold. That was Dorothy. 61 years on this earth and I still couldn't do it as well as she could. I set the phone down and went to take my pills and tried to forget the pause. I couldn't. My name is Harold. I am 67 years old. I live in the same farmhouse in eastern Tennessee where Dorothy and I raised our 2 children. A house with wide pine floors and a porch that wraps around 3 sides and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and something baking until 18 months ago when Dorothy stopped being able to bake and then stopped being able to sit at the kitchen table and then stopped being able to come downstairs at all. My son lives in Seattle. We talk every few weeks. He sends birthday cards that arrive 3 days late and calls on Christmas from whatever time zone he happens to be in. He is not a bad man. He is simply someone who moved far away and built a life that does not have much room in it for Tennessee. My daughter lives 40 minutes from me, in the town where she went to high school, in a house with her husband, a man named Garrett, who sells commercial real estate and drives a truck that is too large for the roads around here, and who has never once in 12 years of marriage to my daughter looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. My daughter's name is Claire. She is 39 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, and she has been calling me every morning since Dorothy died because, she said, she couldn't bear the thought of me lying on the floor for 3 days before anyone noticed. I understood that. I appreciated it. I should have asked sooner why Garrett never complained about the calls. 3 days after that October morning, a man knocked on my front door at 11 in the morning. He was younger than me, maybe 50, with a careful haircut and a sport coat that was too light for the weather. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm, and he smiled the way people smile when they are about to tell you something you don't want to hear. Mr. Harold Baxter? That's me. My name is Dennis Pruitt. I'm an attorney. He held out a business card. I was hoping we could talk. It concerns your property. I looked at the card and then at the man, and then at the truck parked at the end of my gravel drive, a rental with out-of-state plates. Which property? This one, he said. All 42 acres. I let him in because Dorothy raised me to be polite to strangers and because something in his face told me that asking him to leave would not make whatever he was carrying go away. I made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his portfolio and laid a series of documents in front of me with the careful movements of a man who has delivered bad news before and has learned to do it slowly. Mr. Baxter, are you aware that a lien was placed on this property 14 months ago? I set my coffee cup down. I am not. A lien in the amount of $240,000, held by a private lending company called Meridian Capital Partners. He slid a document toward me. The borrower of record is listed as Harold James Baxter. I stared at my own name on the paper for a long time. That's not my signature, I said. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected me to say exactly that. Mr. Baxter, I represent a title company that flagged this lien during a routine review. We have reason to believe this document was fraudulently executed. He paused. We also have reason to believe the fraud may have been carried out by someone with access to your personal identifying information. Your social security number. Your deed documents, possibly your medical history. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post by the garden and sat there looking at the house. My medical history, I repeated. The loan application included documentation suggesting the borrower was in the early stages of cognitive decline and required a financial guardian. He looked at me carefully. The application was co-signed by a family member who represented themselves as your legal caretaker. I looked at the signature line he was pointing to. The co-signer's name was Claire Ann Whitfield, my daughter's married name. I did not call Claire that night. I sat on the porch in the dark with a glass of water I didn't drink, and I thought about all the mornings. 7 o'clock every morning, like clockwork. Did you take your medication, Dad? I thought about the way she had started asking about my memory at family dinners 2 Christmases ago, asking in that soft, careful voice whether I had seen a doctor about the moments when I couldn't find a word, whether I was getting enough sleep, whether I had thought about what would happen to the property if something happened to me. I had thought she was grieving. I had thought she was afraid of losing another parent. I had held her hand across the dinner table and told her I was fine, and that she didn't need to worry. I thought about Garrett's truck in my driveway last spring. The afternoon I came back from the hardware store and found him walking out of my barn. He said he'd stop by to check on me, that Claire had sent him, that he'd knocked and I hadn't answered. I'd thanked him. I'd thought it was kind. I went inside and found the shoebox on the top shelf in my bedroom closet where Dorothy and I kept important papers. The deed was there, the copy of my will, the insurance documents. Everything looked exactly as it should look, but there was a document I didn't recognize, tucked behind the insurance folder, a thin sheaf of papers with a notary stamp on the last page. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed under the lamp and read it twice, because the first time I could not make my mind accept what it said. It was a power of attorney document, dated 16 months ago, 1 month before Dorothy died, signed in my name, granting Claire full legal authority over my financial and medical decisions in the event that 2 licensed physicians determined I was unable to manage my own affairs. I had never seen it before in my life. I called Dennis Pruitt the next morning before 7. Before the phone rang with Claire's daily check-in, I wanted to hear another human voice that was not hers. He answered on the second ring. I told him about the power of attorney document. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mr. Baxter, I need you to not confront your daughter or son-in-law yet. Can you do that for me?" "I can try," I said. "There's something else you should know. Meridian Capital Partners is registered to a holding company in Nevada. That holding company lists 1 officer." He paused. "A Garrett Thomas Whitfield." The room tilted the way rooms tilt when the floor becomes unreliable. I sat down in the kitchen chair without planning to. Through the window I could see the ridge and the morning light on it, and I thought about Dorothy painting it on Saturday mornings with her small brushes and her tin of watercolors, completely absorbed, completely at peace, completely unaware of the world my daughter and her husband had been building around me while she was dying. At 7 o'clock exactly, my phone rang. I answered it. "Did you take your medication, Dad?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. I took it right on time. "Good," she said. "Garrett and I might stop by this weekend. We thought we'd check on the property, make sure everything is okay before winter." "That sounds fine," I said. "I'll make sure I'm home." I hung up and sat with the silence for a long time. Dennis Pruitt connected me with a woman named Vicki Harlan, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse, a term I had not known existed before that week. She had an office in Knoxville and a handshake like a contractor, and she looked at the documents I brought her and did not seem surprised by any of it, which I found both reassuring and deeply sad. "This is not uncommon," she said, which were perhaps the 4 most depressing words anyone had ever said to me. Adult children with financially stressed spouses, a parent who is grieving and isolated, a property with significant value. She set the power of attorney on her desk. "The forged signature is actually quite good. Someone paid for a professional." "Gareth sells commercial real estate," I said. "He would know exactly how these documents need to look," she said. She explained the process. A forensic document examiner to verify the signatures were forged, a complaint filed with the county sheriff and the state attorney general, a motion to invalidate the lien, a motion to revoke the fraudulent power of attorney. It would take time. It would not be quiet. "Your daughter," she said carefully, "do you believe she knew the full extent of what her husband was doing?" I looked out her window at the Knoxville skyline, the afternoon light making the buildings look almost warm. "I don't know," I said honestly, "and I think that's what hurts the most." Vicky filed the documents on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the county sheriff had opened an investigation. Garrett was contacted by investigators that afternoon at his office. He called Claire before he called a lawyer. Claire called me at 4:30 in the afternoon, which was not her usual time. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the last leaves come off the oak tree at the corner of the yard. "Dad." Her voice was different from the morning voice. It was stripped of the careful, practiced quality, the measured concern. What was underneath it was something raw and younger. "Dad, I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening," I said. "I didn't know about the lien." She was crying, not performed crying, not the kind she used sometimes in family arguments to end conversations, but real crying, the ugly kind. "I swear to you I didn't know about the lien. He told me the power of attorney was just a precaution. He said you had agreed to it, that you'd asked him to set it up because you were worried about what would happen to the farm if something happened to you suddenly. He said the two of you had talked about it." "Did you sign the document, Claire?" A long silence. "He had me sign something. He said it was a witness signature. He said you had already signed the main part." I closed my eyes. The oak tree let go of another handful of leaves, and they drifted down across the yard in the afternoon quiet. "And when did you stop believing him?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was so small, it sounded like the voice she'd had at 9 years old. "About 6 months ago, when I found the folder on his computer. But I didn't understand what all of it meant, and I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing him. Of being wrong. She stopped. "Of losing you." I sat with that for a while. The crow that had been visiting the fence post for 3 days landed on it again and regarded me with one bright eye. Dorothy had a saying about fear. She said fear was just love with nowhere to go. I used to think that was too simple, sitting on that porch in October with my daughter crying on the phone while the oak tree lost its leaves. I thought maybe Dorothy had been right about that too. Garrett did not fight the investigation. His attorney advised him to cooperate, which Vicky told me meant they had enough evidence to make fighting pointless. The lien was invalidated. The fraudulent power of attorney was revoked. Garrett agreed to a repayment arrangement and entered into a consent decree with the state attorney general's office that would follow him professionally for the rest of his career. He and Claire separated in November. She moved back into town with the two girls into a rental house near the school they attended. She called me every morning at 7 o'clock without fail. But the question had changed. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Not your medication, just you." I told her the truth each time, which was sometimes good and sometimes not good, and sometimes something in between that didn't have a clean word for it. She listened. She didn't rush off the phone. We talked about Dorothy sometimes, about the watercolors, about the Saturday mornings, about things we had both been too busy grieving separately to grieve together. I am not going to tell you that what Garrett did didn't leave marks. It did. There are mornings when I walk through this house and I think about the fact that someone looked at the place where Dorothy and I raised a family and saw a financial instrument. There are nights when I lie awake and add up the months. All the ordinary mornings when I answered the phone and trusted the voice on the other end of it, and I wonder what else I missed. But I also think about what Vicky said during one of our last meetings, when the paperwork was almost finished and the property was clear, and I was sitting in her office in Knoxville feeling lighter than I had felt in 2 years. She said, "You know what's unusual about your case, Mr. Baxter? Most people in your situation never find out. Someone files something, the property transfers quietly, the family tells itself a story about what was best for everyone. You found out because a title company ran a routine check and an attorney decided it was worth a drive to Tennessee." I thought about Dennis Pruitt standing on my porch in his too light sport coat. "Seems like a lot depended on a stranger doing the right thing," I said. "It usually does," she said. The oak tree in the corner of the yard put out new growth in April, the small, tender leaves that always looked too fragile to survive, but always did. I was standing on the porch drinking my coffee when Claire pulled up with the girls for their Saturday visit, the first one where she stayed for dinner instead of just dropping them off. She walked up the porch steps and hugged me in the doorway and held on a moment longer than usual. The girls went straight to the barn to visit the old cat that had lived there since they were babies. Claire sat at the kitchen table while I made sandwiches, and for a while, neither of us said anything, just occupied the kitchen the way people do when they have learned to be comfortable in each other's silence. "I want to say something," she said finally. "You don't have to," I told her. "I do." She looked at her hands on the table. "I let myself be blind because it was easier than seeing. And you almost lost everything because of it. That's not something I can make small, just because I didn't understand everything that was happening." I set 2 plates on the table and sat down across from her. Outside the kitchen window, I could see the ridge. The same ridge Dorothy had painted 100 times, the light on it doing what it always did in spring, making everything look like it was just starting. "Your mother had a theory," I said, "about fear." Claire looked up at me. She said fear was just love with nowhere to go. I looked at my daughter, at her mother's eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, and the new careful quality around them that grief and hard truth had put there. "I've been thinking you had a lot of love and a lot of fear, and they got all tangled up together. I don't think that makes you a bad person, Claire. I think it makes you someone who went through something hard and came out the other side knowing better." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like Mom." "Most of the good things I know sound like Mom," I said. The girls came in from the barn, loud and grass-stained and wanting to know what was for lunch, and the kitchen filled up with their noise the way it used to fill up on Saturdays. And I stood up to get more plates and thought about Dorothy at the window, with her watercolors and her small brushes and her particular way of seeing the ridge as something beautiful instead of just something ordinary. The next morning at 7 o'clock, the phone rang. I picked it up before the second ring. "How are you feeling, Dad? Just you?" "Good," I said, and I meant it in a way I hadn't for a long time. "I'm feeling good. I have thought a lot about what it means to trust someone. Not the easy kind of trust, the kind you give a stranger who holds a door open for you, but the deep kind, the kind you build over decades with someone who shares your name, who sat at your table, who cried at their mother's funeral standing next to you. That kind of trust does not break cleanly. It tears, and the tearing takes a long time. What happened to me was not an accident. It was a series of choices made by people who told themselves stories about why those choices were acceptable. That is the part I have had to sit with the longest. Not the forged signature, not the fraudulent lien, but the fact that someone looked at a grieving old man and saw an opportunity, and then made that choice again and again over 14 months while looking me in the eye. I do not think most people are born willing to do that. I think it happens gradually, the way a house settles, one small compromise at a time, until the foundation is something different from what it started as. Garrett did not wake up one morning as the man who would steal his father-in-law's farm. He became that man slowly, and the becoming required him to stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as a problem to be managed. That is what greed does when it goes unchecked. It does not just take your money. It takes your ability to see people clearly. Claire's failure was different. Hers was the failure of fear, and I understand it better than I wish I did. She saw things that troubled her, and she chose the explanation that cost her the least. That is a human thing to do. It is also a costly thing to do, because the longer you choose the comfortable explanation, the more the truth has to work against you to get your attention. By the time the truth arrived at Claire's door, it arrived with investigators and legal documents, and the end of her marriage. What I've learned from all of it is that clarity is not a gift, it is a discipline. Every day you have to choose to see what is actually in front of you, rather than what you need to be there. I did not do that well enough in those 14 months. I saw a daughter who called every morning, and I told myself it was love, and it was love, mixed up with fear and weakness, and a husband who had learned to use both against her. I should have looked harder at the pauses. I should have trusted what Dorothy always told me to trust. The farm is still mine. The oak tree put out new leaves in April. My daughter brings her girls on Saturdays and we eat lunch at the kitchen table, and sometimes we talk about Dorothy, And sometimes we just sit in the same room and let the quiet be what it is. I am not a man who believes that suffering is wasted if you learn something from it. I am a man who believes that what you do after the hard thing is the only measure that matters. Harold Baxter is still standing. The morning calls still come at 7, and when I answer them now, I listen not just to the words but to everything underneath them, because that is where the truth has always lived, in the space between what people say and what they mean. I should have known that sooner. I know it now. That is enough to keep going.